They laughed at the empty chair beside Clara Bennett long before anyone realized it belonged to the most feared man in the building. The ballroom of the Ashcroft Diplomatic Foundation shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers and gold-trimmed balconies as senators, defense executives, and media donors drifted between candlelit tables holding glasses of champagne worth more than most Americans spent on groceries in a week, but near the back corner of the room, the laughter had already started. She came alone. A woman in an emerald silk gown whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Another leaned closer, studying Clara over the rim of her wine glass. No ring worth mentioning. Wrong dress. Wrong posture. She's either lost or desperate. A few quiet chuckles followed. Clara heard every word. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her oversized brown coat and remained seated beside the untouched place card marked reserved. That only made them more curious. At 34, Clara looked painfully ordinary among the polished elite crowd surrounding her. Her olive-green satin dress looked years old beneath the ballroom lights, her auburn hair loosely tied at the nape of her neck as if she'd prepared in the dark, and the faint freckles across her pale face gave her none of the sculpted perfection the room was accustomed to admiring. But what unsettled people most was not her appearance. It was her stillness. She wasn't nervous enough. Maybe she got stood up, a man smirked from the neighboring table. Or maybe she thought this was some charity buffet. More laughter. Across the room, a young political blogger subtly lifted his phone and snapped a photo of Clara sitting alone beside the empty chair. Within minutes, whispers began moving table to table like invisible smoke. Mystery woman crashes diplomatic gala. Uninvited guest. Escort. Staff error. Clara noticed the glances multiplying. Waiters stopped offering her champagne. Conversations lowered when she walked past. One donor's wife physically moved her purse when Clara approached the restroom corridor. The humiliation was elegant. Refined. The kind rich people mastered over generations. Then came the first escalation. A foundation coordinator in a black tuxedo approached her table with a strained smile that barely concealed panic. "Ma'am," he said softly, "there may have been a seating misunderstanding." Nearby guests immediately fell silent, pretending not to listen. Clara looked up at him calmly. Her gray-green eyes never wavered. "No misunderstanding," she replied quietly. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The coordinator hesitated. That answer somehow made the situation worse. Across the ballroom, another ripple of laughter spread as eyes drifted once more toward the empty chair beside her. And high above the orchestra's soft violin music, the massive entrance doors at the far end of the ballroom suddenly opened. The orchestra faltered for half a second as heads turned toward the entrance doors, but instead of some dramatic arrival, only a group of late donors stepped inside laughing among themselves, their coats dusted with melting snow from the Boston streets outside. A soft wave of disappointment rolled through the ballroom, followed almost immediately by fresh amusement directed toward Clara's table. "False alarm," someone muttered. "Looks like her mystery husband is not coming after all." The political blogger from earlier glanced down at his phone with a grin spreading across his face. His post had already gained traction among local social circles. He angled the screen toward a woman beside him. "Look," he whispered. "People are asking if she is some senator's abandoned mistress." The woman covered her mouth to hide a laugh, but Clara saw it. She saw all of it. Still, she remained motionless beside the empty chair. That calmness began irritating people more than if she had cried or left in embarrassment. Across the ballroom, retired General Marcus Holloway studied her from the donor stage with narrowed eyes. Unlike the others, he did not laugh. He had spent 30 years negotiating with diplomats and military contractors. He recognized composure when he saw it. And the woman sitting alone at table 17 carried herself like someone accustomed to pressure far greater than social humiliation. Meanwhile, the foundation coordinator returned, this time with visible tension tightening his jaw. "Ma'am," he said more firmly, "the board is concerned this situation may become uncomfortable for everyone involved." Clara slowly looked up from the untouched glass of water in front of her. "For everyone?" she asked quietly. The coordinator hesitated. Nearby guests leaned closer, pretending to continue their conversations while listening to every word. "There are important people here tonight," he explained carefully. "Defense officials. International partners. Security protocols are extremely sensitive." A man from the adjacent table smirked into his whiskey. "Translation," he interrupted casually, "they want to know who invited you." A few guests laughed again. Clara finally reached into her coat pocket, and for one suspended moment, several people expected her to pull out some cheap invitation or explanation that would expose her completely. Instead, she placed a simple silver hotel room key on the table beside her plate. General Holloway's expression changed instantly. Very slightly. Almost imperceptibly. But enough. Because etched into the keycard was the insignia of Blackthorn International, a private diplomatic security firm so exclusive most people in that ballroom had only heard rumors about it. Clara noticed the shift in his face and calmly slid the card back into her pocket before anyone else could read it clearly. The general stood abruptly from the stage. "Excuse me," he said to the donors near him, his tone suddenly distracted. That was when the first seed of unease entered the room. Not fear. Not yet. But something colder. The uncomfortable realization that perhaps the quiet woman they had spent 20 minutes humiliating knew things they did not. The mood inside the ballroom shifted so subtly that most guests could not identify the exact moment it happened. The laughter did not disappear all at once. It simply became quieter, less confident, as whispers began threading between tables beneath the low glow of chandeliers and candlelight. General Holloway crossed the room with measured steps, ignoring several donors attempting to stop him mid-conversation. Clara watched him approach without surprise. The old general stopped beside her table and glanced briefly at the empty chair before lowering his voice. "Where did you get that keycard?" Around them, nearby guests pretended not to stare. Clara folded her hands calmly in her lap. "It was given to me." Holloway studied her face carefully, searching for hesitation, but found none. "By whom?" Before Clara could answer, the political blogger suddenly appeared beside the table holding his phone with poorly concealed excitement. "General, sir, is everything all right here?" he asked loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear. "People online are already talking about her." Clara saw the blogger's screen reflected in the polished silver centerpiece. Her photograph had spread through social media circles connected to the gala. Comments scrolled rapidly beneath it. "Fake guest." "Gold digger." "Escort left behind." "Attention seeker." One message stood out above the others. "Check who reserved table 17. The blogger grinned nervously, clearly enjoying the attention his post was creating. "Honestly, this whole thing is becoming kind of legendary," he laughed. "Nobody even knows who she is." Holloway's expression hardened instantly. "Then perhaps," he replied coldly, "you should have thought about that before turning her into entertainment." The blogger's smile faltered. Across the ballroom, several conversations abruptly stopped as more guests noticed the tension building around Clara's table. A violinist missed a note. Waitstaff slowed near the donor stage. Even the foundation coordinator looked pale now. Clara remained composed beneath the pressure closing around her from every direction. But inside, old memories had begun surfacing. Small-town diners off frozen Montana highways. Truckers leaving crumpled dollar bills beside coffee cups at 2 in the morning. Men in expensive suits who never looked directly at waitresses while discussing billion-dollar contracts over pie and black coffee. She had spent years learning how invisible women were treated in rooms controlled by power. And she had also learned something else. Powerful people became terrified the moment they realized they may have underestimated someone. Holloway finally pulled out the chair beside Clara and sat down quietly. That single act sent visible shock through the surrounding tables. A retired four-star general did not sit with nobodies. "I asked who gave you the card," he repeated carefully. Clara looked toward the ballroom entrance where snow drifted faintly beyond the glass doors. "Someone who trusts me," she answered. The general exhaled slowly, then lowered his voice further. "Miss Bennett. Blackthorn International does not hand out access lightly. That insignia is restricted to high-level diplomatic clearance." Nearby guests overheard enough to stiffen visibly. One donor nearly dropped his champagne flute. The political blogger blinked in confusion. "Wait," he muttered, looking back toward Clara. "Who exactly are you?" Clara met his eyes for the first time all evening. Her expression did not change. "That depends," she said softly, "on who finally walks through that door." By 8:30 that evening, Table 17 had become the center of the entire ballroom without anyone officially acknowledging it. Conversations continued, glasses clinked softly beneath chandelier light, and the orchestra played polished jazz standards near the marble staircase, but every few seconds another pair of eyes drifted back toward Clara Bennett and the empty chair beside her. The humiliation had evolved into something stranger now. Suspicion. Curiosity. Unease. The political blogger deleted his original post after General Holloway's warning, but the damage had already spread beyond the ballroom walls. Several guests were quietly searching Clara's name on their phones beneath the tablecloths. Nothing substantial appeared. No socialite history. No political donor records. No glamorous photographs beside yachts or campaign dinners. Just fragments. Montana. Temporary government contracts. Diplomatic consulting references sealed behind restricted databases. One hedge fund executive frowned at his screen and whispered to his wife, "Most civilian profiles do not get classified clearance tags." Across the room, the foundation coordinator was speaking rapidly into an earpiece while glancing repeatedly toward the entrance. Doors. Sweat had begun forming near his collar despite the winter chill lingering through the glass atrium outside. Whatever had started as social embarrassment was now becoming an operational concern. Then another shift hit the room. 3 men in dark suits entered quietly through a side corridor near the donor stage. They did not look like guests. No champagne. No smiles. Their eyes scanned exits, ceiling corners, security placements. One of them walked directly to General Holloway and leaned down beside him. The old general listened for several seconds before his expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He stood immediately. That movement alone caused nearby conversations to collapse into silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the gala host suddenly from the microphone near the stage, his voice carrying forced composure, "we may experience a brief delay before tonight's keynote arrival." The ballroom reacted instantly. Nervous whispers spread table to table. Keynote arrival? Who are they waiting for? What is happening? Clara remained seated, her hands folded calmly beside the untouched silverware. The host glanced toward her for only half a second before quickly looking away again. And people noticed. One woman near the center table slowly lowered her champagne flute. "Oh my God," she whispered. "This whole night is about her, is it not?" Another donor shook his head immediately. "Impossible." But his voice lacked conviction now. The political blogger stared at Clara with growing discomfort. "You knew," he murmured under his breath. "You knew this entire time." Clara finally allowed herself the faintest hint of a smile, though it carried no arrogance. Only exhaustion. "People reveal themselves very quickly," she said softly. "Especially when they think someone has no power." Then, from outside the ballroom, the deep echo of multiple engines rolled through the winter air beyond the glass entrance. The orchestra stopped playing completely this time. Several security personnel straightened at once. And somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. The sound of engines outside did something no speech that night had managed to accomplish. It erased every remaining trace of mockery from the ballroom. Guests who had spent the last hour whispering about Clara Bennett now sat rigid beneath the chandelier light, their attention locked toward the towering glass entrance doors overlooking the snowy Boston street outside. Through the frosted windows, black vehicles rolled to a stop one by one with deliberate precision, their headlights cutting through the drifting winter fog like silent warnings. Nobody spoke at first. Then came the whispers. "That is federal security." "No. Private." "Who is arriving?" The foundation coordinator looked moments away from collapse. 2 additional security agents entered through the side corridor, speaking quietly into concealed microphones while scanning the ballroom with controlled urgency. Several influential guests suddenly became aware that this event was no longer operating under ordinary rules. At table 17, Clara finally lifted her untouched glass of water and took a small sip, her expression unreadable. Across from her, General Holloway watched carefully. "You could have avoided all of this," he said quietly. Clara lowered the glass. "No," she replied softly. "People needed to show me who they were before he arrived." The general leaned back slowly, absorbing the weight of that sentence. Nearby guests overheard enough to exchange uneasy glances. Suddenly the ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the entrance doors unlocked with a deep metallic sound that echoed through the marble hall. Every conversation died instantly. The orchestra lowered their instruments. Even the waitstaff froze. 3 security personnel entered first, dressed in dark overcoats with earpieces barely visible beneath their collars. They moved with the kind of discipline that made powerful people instinctively step aside without being asked. And then he appeared. Adrian Bennett stepped through the doorway carrying the cold winter air behind him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal overcoat over a perfectly tailored black suit, he carried none of the theatrical arrogance people expected from billionaires. In fact, what unsettled the room most was how little effort he made to command attention. Yet the entire ballroom shifted around him automatically. Defense executives straightened in their seats. 2 senators stopped mid-conversation. One donor near the stage quietly whispered, "Dear God." Because everyone in that room knew Adrian Bennett. Founder of Blackthorn International. Diplomatic negotiator. The man governments called when negotiations collapsed and international crises threatened American lives overseas. Rumors about him had circulated through Washington for years. Some called him a genius. Others called him dangerous. But no one called him unimportant. The political blogger went visibly pale as realization crashed across his face. He looked from Adrian Bennett to Clara and back again, horror slowly replacing curiosity. Clara did not stand immediately. She simply watched as Adrian crossed the ballroom floor toward table 17 while dozens of wealthy guests instinctively parted to clear a path for him. The silence became unbearable. Then Adrian reached the empty chair beside Clara, removed his gloves calmly, and before sitting down, gently kissed the top of her head. "I am sorry I am late," he said quietly. The negotiations in Zurich took longer than expected. And in that single moment, the entire ballroom realized the woman they had mocked for attending alone had never been abandoned at all. No one in the ballroom recovered fast enough to hide the change in their faces. The same people who had laughed at Clara Bennett an hour earlier were now sitting frozen beneath the chandelier light, desperately replaying every word they had spoken within earshot of table 17. The political blogger quietly locked his phone screen and lowered it beneath the tablecloth as if the device itself had become dangerous to hold. Across the room, the woman in the emerald gown who had mocked Clara's appearance earlier suddenly looked deeply interested in her untouched dessert plate. Adrian Bennett removed his coat slowly while security personnel discreetly repositioned themselves near the ballroom perimeter. He carried himself with calm precision, but what unsettled people most was the way powerful men reacted around him. Senators who normally demanded attention waited for his acknowledgement before approaching. Executives lowered their voices when he passed. Even the gala host seemed uncertain whether to resume the evening program without permission. But Adrian's attention remained entirely on Clara. "Did they give you trouble?" he asked quietly while taking his seat beside her. Clara glanced around the room. Several nearby guests immediately looked away the moment her eyes moved toward them. "Not exactly," she replied softly. "They just revealed themselves." Adrian nodded once as though that answer confirmed something he already suspected. General Holloway remained standing near the table, his expression grave now rather than curious. "Adrian," he said carefully, "there are concerns circulating among the board tonight." Adrian finally looked up. The room seemed to tighten around that simple movement. "About what?" The general hesitated briefly. "People are asking why someone with Clara's level of clearance was seated without formal introduction." A silence followed that felt heavier than the orchestra music drifting faintly through the ballroom. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair. "Because my wife did not attend tonight as decoration," he answered calmly. Several nearby guests visibly stiffened. "Most of the people in this room," Adrian continued, "believe influence comes from cameras, speeches, or donor lists." His gaze swept slowly across the ballroom. "But some of the most important work in the world happens quietly. Usually by people intelligent enough not to advertise it." The political blogger swallowed hard. A defense contractor near the stage shifted uncomfortably. Clara lowered her eyes briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention now turning toward her. And that alone made the contrast even sharper. She did not enjoy power. Which was exactly why she carried it differently than everyone else in the room. Then the final shift arrived. The gala host stepped onto the stage holding a tablet with trembling hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced carefully, "before tonight's keynote address, Blackthorn International has requested recognition for a private contributor whose work has directly assisted multiple hostage recovery operations involving American journalists overseas." A murmur spread instantly across the ballroom. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. Adrian remained calm beside her. The host looked down at the screen again before continuing. "Until tonight, her identity was classified." The room fell completely silent. Then the host spoke the name that shattered the final illusion left in the ballroom. "Clara Bennett." For several seconds after Clara Bennett's name echoed across the ballroom, nobody moved. The silence felt almost unnatural, as though the entire building itself had stopped breathing beneath the crystal chandeliers and marble balconies. Then came the reactions. A woman near the center table slowly sat back down after instinctively beginning to stand. One donor whispered, "That cannot be the same woman." Another stared openly at Clara with visible disbelief, replaying every moment from earlier that evening when she had been ignored, mocked, and quietly pushed aside like an inconvenience. The political blogger looked physically ill now. His fingers trembled slightly as he reopened his phone and began frantically deleting photographs and comments connected to Clara's humiliation. But it was too late. Across the ballroom, several people had already recognized the name. Not from tabloids or society pages. From classified briefings, diplomatic rumors, and quiet conversations held behind secured government doors. The gala host cleared his throat nervously while reading from the tablet. Over the past 4 years, Miss Bennett has served as a confidential strategic advisor during multiple international hostage recovery operations involving American civilians and journalists. Murmurs swept the ballroom again, but this time no one laughed. Her negotiation frameworks, the host continued carefully, have been credited with preventing escalation during several overseas crises considered too politically sensitive for public disclosure. The room had gone completely still now. Clara lowered her eyes briefly as if she wished the announcement would end. That reaction alone unsettled people even more. She was not enjoying this moment. She had never come seeking recognition. Adrian watched her quietly beside him, understanding her discomfort without needing words. General Holloway stepped closer to the microphone near the donor stage. "Most of you have spent years discussing diplomacy from conference tables," he said calmly. "Clara Bennett has actually kept Americans alive while cameras were turned off." No one dared interrupt him. The same guests who earlier questioned whether Clara belonged in the ballroom now looked at her with cautious respect bordering on fear. Because the humiliation had reversed completely. And everyone felt it happening in real time. The woman in the emerald gown finally stood and approached table 17 slowly, forcing an uneasy smile. "Miss Bennett," she began softly, "I think perhaps we got off on the wrong foot tonight." Clara looked up at her gently. There was no anger in her face. Which somehow made the moment worse. "No," Clara replied quietly. "You understood exactly who you thought I was." The woman froze mid-breath. Around them, several nearby guests lowered their eyes in shame. Even the orchestra remained silent now, as though music itself no longer belonged in the room. Then the political blogger approached next, his voice strained. "Miss Bennett. I would like to apologize publicly for the assumptions made tonight." Clara studied him for a long moment before answering. "You did not create those assumptions," she said softly. "You only broadcast what everyone else already believed." The words landed harder than any public humiliation ever could. The young blogger swallowed visibly, unable to respond. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, watching the room absorb the weight of Clara's quiet dignity. And beneath the soft gold lighting of the ballroom, powerful people began realizing something deeply uncomfortable. The most important person in the room had been the one they treated as invisible. The ballroom never fully recovered after that. Even as the orchestra cautiously resumed playing soft piano melodies near the stage, the atmosphere had changed too completely for anyone to pretend the evening was normal again. The polished confidence that once filled the room had fractured beneath something quieter and far more uncomfortable. Shame. Clara Bennett noticed it everywhere now. In the forced smiles of donors suddenly eager to greet her. In the stiff posture of guests who had mocked her hours earlier and now could not maintain eye contact for more than a second. In the nervous laughter that died too quickly whenever conversations drifted near table 17. The same people who once treated Clara like an outsider now competed subtly for proximity to her table. A senator's wife approached carrying 2 glasses of champagne she clearly had not poured herself. "Miss Bennett," she said warmly, as though they had been friends all evening, "would love to hear more about your humanitarian work sometime." Clara accepted the gesture politely but did not touch the champagne. "Most of it cannot be discussed publicly," she replied softly. The woman's smile faltered instantly. Nearby guests overheard enough to exchange uneasy glances again. The mystery surrounding Clara had become heavier than wealth itself. Across the ballroom, the political blogger sat alone staring at the blank screen of his phone. Earlier that evening he had chased humiliation because humiliation attracted attention. Now he understood something brutal about power in America. The truly important people rarely looked important at all. General Holloway eventually stepped onto the donor stage once more, his deep voice cutting gently through the ballroom noise. "Tonight's fundraising goal has officially been exceeded," he announced. Applause followed automatically, though weaker than expected. Most guests remained distracted by Clara's presence. Holloway continued carefully. "However, there is one final acknowledgement that must be made." The room quieted again. Several American journalists alive today owe their safe return home to strategic decisions made by Miss Bennett during negotiations that never reached public headlines. A hush fell across the ballroom. Families were reunited because she succeeded where governments failed. No one moved. Clara lowered her eyes again, visibly uncomfortable. With every sentence, Adrian noticed immediately. He reached over and quietly adjusted the sleeve of her oversized brown coat where it had slipped slightly near her wrist, a small intimate gesture so natural and protective that several nearby guests suddenly looked away, embarrassed by how cruelly they had judged her earlier. Then came the final emotional shift. An older woman near the back of the ballroom slowly stood from her table. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "My son was one of those journalists." Every head turned toward her. Tears shimmered in her eyes beneath the chandelier light. "We were told someone kept the negotiations alive when everyone else wanted to give up." She looked directly at Clara. "That someone was you, was it not?" The room fell silent once more. Clara hesitated for a moment before answering softly. "Your son came home because people refused to stop trying." The woman pressed a trembling hand over her mouth as emotion overtook her completely. And in that instant, the ballroom understood something no amount of money or status could imitate. Respect given by fear was temporary. But respect earned through quiet sacrifice changed an entire room forever. By the time the gala neared its end, snow had begun falling harder beyond the towering glass windows of the ballroom, soft white flakes drifting through the Boston night while the city lights blurred beneath the storm. Inside, the energy had settled into something quieter now. Less like a celebration. More like a room full of people confronting uncomfortable truths they had not expected to face when they arrived in tailored tuxedos and diamond jewelry hours earlier. Clara Bennett remained at table 17 beside Adrian, still wearing the same olive green dress and oversized brown coat that had first drawn whispers and ridicule when she entered alone. Nothing about her appearance had changed. Yet somehow the entire room now saw her differently. That realization lingered heavily in the air. One by one, guests approached her table before leaving for the evening. Some offered apologies. Others thanked her awkwardly for work they barely understood. A few simply nodded respectfully. Unable to find words at all. Clara accepted every interaction with the same quiet composure she had carried from the beginning. No triumph. No bitterness. Just calm dignity that somehow made people feel even smaller beside her. Near the ballroom exit, the political blogger paused before putting on his coat. He glanced back toward Clara one last time while staff extinguished candles across the donor tables. Earlier that evening he had viewed her as content. A strange woman sitting alone in the wrong room. Now he understood he had nearly turned someone's sacrifice into entertainment because she did not look important enough to deserve basic respect. Slowly, he deleted the final draft of the article still sitting unsent on his phone. Across the room, General Holloway stood near the windows watching snow collect against the city streets below. "Funny thing about power," he murmured quietly to Adrian. "The people who chase it usually carry it the worst." Adrian looked toward Clara as she spoke softly with the mother of the rescued journalist near the stage. "That is why Clara never wanted recognition," he replied. "She understands what attention costs." The orchestra had stopped playing entirely now. Only the faint sound of silverware being cleared and winter wind brushing against the glass remained. Clara eventually returned to table 17 and slipped her hands into the sleeves of her coat. Adrian stood immediately to help her with it, not because she needed assistance, but because after everything that evening had revealed, small acts of respect suddenly carried more meaning than grand speeches ever could. As they walked toward the ballroom exit together, conversation softened around them. People stepped aside naturally without being asked. Not out of fear. Out of something far rarer. Understanding. Just before reaching the doors, Clara glanced briefly toward the now empty chair beside the table where the night had begun. The same chair people once laughed at. The same silence they once mocked. For a moment, her expression softened with something almost sad. Because somewhere deep down, she knew the world would probably do this again tomorrow to someone else. Who looked ordinary. Another quiet woman. Another overlooked stranger. Another person judged before being understood. Then Adrian gently placed his hand against the small of her back, and together they disappeared into the falling snow beyond the ballroom lights while behind them, an entire room remained unusually quiet long after they were gone.